Okay, so again, I repeat for who tuned in now. This is Emanuele Del Rosso. I'm social media manager of the Cartoon Movement, and this is the first episode of Satire Talks Live. This is a format that we thought of some weeks ago because um, well, first of all, we know that a lot of people are stuck in the house, so maybe that could also be interesting for them because they are home and they have time to tune in to hear about satire in these difficult times. And second of all, because of course it's important to keep the discussion alive about what satire can do for democracy when democracy that is at stake, like basically always. And also it's really interesting to be able to talk to different cartoonists. So for this first episode, we have actually the editor-in-chief of the Cartoon Movement, which is Thierry Royerts. I'm not gonna present you. I think you can say something yourself
Okay.
about you, and then also maybe present the Cartoon Movement a bit.
Yeah, sure. Definitely. So, hi everyone. Nice to be doing this. This is the first for me and for us at Cartoon Movement as well, doing live stuff like this. So it's really nice to be here and to talk about satire. So my name is Tjeerd. I am an editorial cartoonist myself. I have been a political cartoonist for about 15 years now. And 10 years ago, this year, 10 years ago, I founded Cartoon Movement. And Cartoon Movement is a website dedicated to international political cartoons. So we have a network of, I think it's more than 500 cartoonists now from over 80 countries. And they send in cartoons to our website every day on the international news. As you can imagine, the last month has been almost nothing but Corona and everything that has to do with the coronavirus and the pandemic. And we publish their cartoons, and we also resell their cartoons to other media and do different projects related to cartoons, related to satire, basically anything that has to do with visual satire. So that's it in a nutshell. And I'm here at the Cartoon Movement headquarters, which is completely empty at the moment, in a basement somewhere in Amsterdam, where we kind of do our work. And Emmanuel is stuck at home, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it's a difficult period, and I actually just like a brief parenthesis. I also lost my job because of the virus, so I've got lots of time. I mean, I am a political cartoonist myself, although my career is really tiny if compared to the one of Thierry or of other cartoonists that we will interview in the next episodes. But I have time to do illustration, so at least I can do something with my free time and then develop that. I just want to open another parenthesis. Of course, questions are allowed for whoever wants to ask a question. There's a question mark at the bottom. You can just write it down and I will just see it appearing on the screen and I will read it immediately. So then we can just answer. So we will just like interrupt my questions and answer yours. So yeah, but tell me more again about the Cartoon Movement, because I mean, I some days ago I don't remember how I was reading about it, and it's 10 years now, right? That the Cartoon
Yes.
Movement is on. Do you want to
Yeah.
like, for example, like I mean, I know that as a like a working experience and background, you are not an artist for like in the broader sense of speaking, meaning that you started with an art academy or things like this. So you had different jobs as well before, and like how did you come up with the idea of the Cartoon Movement, and who was working with you at the beginning,
Sure.
and why it was
Yeah.
created?
Yeah. So my background is actually in political science. So I studied political science. And when I was studying politics, I kind of started drawing because I think the one thing that all cartoonists all over the world have in common is that they all like to draw. So like every other cartoonist, I like drawing from a young age onward. And then when I was 18, I had to decide whether I wanted to go to art academy or whether I wanted to do something else. Something else. And at the time, I wasn't. I was interested in drawing, but I wasn't really all that interested in art. So I wanted to learn more about the world. So that's why I chose for political science. And then for a few years, I never considered doing anything with art or pursuing that. But I started to draw again, first for the political science magazine, then for the faculty magazine, and eventually for the university magazine. And I started to make political stuff because I was studying politics. So that's what made me make the link between politics and between art. And for the university magazine, I actually started to get a little money for it. So then I thought, hey, I can maybe make this into a career. And after I graduated or got my master's, I decided to pursue that. And of course, like every other cartoonist I know, for the first couple of years, I made very little money. So I had to do all these other shitty jobs. I was a mover. I worked in a wholesale selling groceries. I did a bunch of, lousy jobs to basically pay the rent. But always part-time and always focusing all the other hours that I had on doing political cartoons and trying to write to newspapers, trying to get into the magazines, and basically trying to build that career. And then I knew two people via my network that was building, that were setting up a new website called the Video Journalism Movement. And this was in 2008. And they had a little money, and their idea was basically to build a global network of video journalists on a website, and to have them tell stories, and to give them the space and the platform to tell stories that they couldn't tell in regular media. And they asked me if I could do some stuff for them, to help think about how this website should look, and basically do some research, stuff like that. And one day over lunch, Thomas, one of the founders, he asked me, so this thing we're now doing with video journalists, is there anything like it for cartoonists, like a global network? And I said, well, no, not that I know of. And he said, well, would you like to build it? And I said, yeah, I would. And that's what got the ball rolling. And then it started really, really small. So basically I just started sending emails to some of the cartoonists that I admired. And I said, hey, we're building a new website, which is geared towards giving cartoonists an online platform, which is also geared towards paying cartoonists for their work. Would you be interested in joining and publishing your work with us? And I got a lot of positive response. So for the VJ movement, as it was then called, it launched in 2008. And at that time, it was a site that was mostly for video journalists, which happened to also host a bunch of cartoonists. But the cartoon part proved so popular over the next 2 years, and we got more and more cartoonists in, and cartoons were becoming the most popular feature of the site, that in 2010 we decided to make a dedicated site and organization for the cartoonists, which became the Cartoon Movement. And in December 2010 we launched. So the idea is to celebrate that this year in December as well, if the coronavirus has passed, and if we can, because I was actually talking to a museum to do an exhibition at the end of the year about 10 years in Cartoon Movement. So hopefully that will be happening. But yeah, so 2010 we launched, and we've been going ever since. And the coolest thing is that to me, one of the coolest things is the dynamic that we still have on the website, which has only gotten better as the years have progressed, of cartoonists supporting each other, of people admiring cartoonists' work, of building an audience that is interested in looking at international satire, that is interested in seeing perspectives and viewpoints from different parts of the world. And that's something that that I still enjoy seeing day to day as editor of the website, and I hope other people enjoy it as well. And it seems that they seem to do, because our audience is still growing, and the number of cartoonists that want to join us is still growing. I think that it's also helped by all the things that happened in the world in the last few years. It's been such a turmoil, starting with the election of Trump, and then with Brexit, then with the refugee crisis, the climate crisis, and now the pandemic. There's just so much going on in these last, I'd say 5-6 years.
I think it maybe started with Charlie Hebdo. I think I remember the time I was an intern for R&W Media, an NGO. I was actually doing illustrations with them and so on, and there was this attack. And I mean, I think it's enough to say the number of copies that Charlie Hebdo is selling. I think it's like 100 times more than what they were selling before. They had
Yeah.
an increase of audience also because I think, I mean, for the good and for the bad, the attack at their newsroom in the center of Paris just brought into the eyes of the public the fact that satire is attacked and is targeted. So, and it's also because probably there's something more into that that actually speaks to a broad audience. I remember
Yeah.
that we were talking about it some time ago, and actually a couple of weeks ago, and you told me that also the audience, because of the coronavirus outbreak, is increasing more and more. So basically, you had like a hockey stick increase in the last year, basically, right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I think all journalists are seeing that across the board, that people are more into news. But the surprising thing is that people are also really into satire and are interested in seeing the satiric take and the take that cartoonists have on what's happening in the world. And it's understandable as well. If you have like a Trump that has this remark of, oh, people should inject themselves with disinfectant, that it you want to know what cartoonists are going to do with that, because it's such a a good starting point for a cartoon. And then so for me, and that might be a bit, of course, due to my profession, that I immediately think, oh, what are all my colleagues going to do with this remark? Because you're going to see like hundreds of cartoons about that one remark by Trump. But I think a lot of people, are interested in seeing, how cartoonists will tackle that issue or tackle that subject.
In a sense, it's also silly because I met many cartoonists that are actually even over 70, and they told me that at the beginning of their career, it was really a bonanza for cartoonists. They were paid a lot by newspapers. They had pages and pages on newspapers, so there were much more money. But actually, globalization brought a much larger audience for cartoons, but at the same time, they're also paid much less because
Yeah.
I do illustrations, but for me, it's really difficult to get them to be paid because, of course, like the web is just like a place in which you can freely publish, so people can just grab your cartoons and things like this. So,
Exactly. Yeah.
what's your take about it? I'm guessing that one of the missions of the cartoon movement is actually make the cartoonists be paid, because of course you pay the
Yeah.
cartoonists that you publish on the homepage. But what's your opinion about it? I mean, satire is absolutely has like the spotlight on it, but at the same time, it's tougher and tougher for cartoonists
Yeah.
to actually make this as a profession, right?
Yes, it is, and I think that's the biggest threat to political cartooning. It's probably an even bigger threat than oppressive regimes and dictatorships and a crackdown on press freedom. It's the economic model behind doing cartoons, because what you see happening is, because it's getting harder and harder to get paid for cartoons, is that less and less young people are going into the profession of becoming a political cartoonist. So I think the average age of political cartoonists is around 60, for the professional ones. And there's just no new generation ready to take over. Why not? There's no money in it. Why the fuck would you become a political cartoonist if if you can't pay the rent, but you can't pay the bills? It's just not a viable profession anymore, which is really, really difficult. So what at Cartoon Movement, we tried our very best to counter this culture of free content, and to say, hey, cartooning is a profession, and if you want good visual content, if you want good professional cartoons or good political cartoons, you need to pay a fair amount for it. That said, it is really, really difficult. I could spend easily 40 hours a week just chasing down copyright infringements of cartoons that are taken from Cartoon Movement, not just by other people, but by other media. I could spend 40 hours, doing emails, chasing them up. The problem is that for every copyright infringement, if it's successful and you get in contact with the editor that published it, and if you get a little amount of money for it, it's usually like 50 euros, 75 euros. So basically what you have done in those 40 hours is you've spent per infringement probably 4 hours, and you get like 50 euros. It's just not worth it. If you calculate it back to an hourly rate, it just doesn't make sense to chase up every copyright infringement. So at Cartoon Movement, what we try to do is we try to go after the big ones. So the big newspapers, the big infringements, and all the other ones. I try to do them when I get around to it. But I also advise cartoonists always, go track them yourselves, because basically we don't have the resources to do it. So it's a very big issue. Also, it's the online culture that needs to change, basically.
There's actually a question in the chat that I'm going to read you, because I think it's also connected with what you're saying. So the question is, do you believe political memes are taking over cartoons for the younger generation? In a way, it's also connected, because then that would mean that everybody can do satire, which is actually true to me, honestly. So you can express yourself, and with a political meme, you can just do satire. But do you believe that there's a conflict in between the two things?
I don't think there's necessarily conflict. There has been a lot of discussion over the last 2-3 years about memes and about how they relate to political cartoons. First of all, there's not that many political memes. If you look at the wider landscape of memes and the total amount of memes that are being made, the political memes that would be akin to political cartoons is actually a very tiny segment of those. And I think those can exist alongside political cartooning fine. That's no problem. And as you say, it's a good democratization of the art as well, in the sense that everybody can do satire. On the other hand, I read this article, and I don't remember where it was, but it basically said that memes should take over from political cartoons, because the fact that everybody can make them would mean this democratization, and would basically make or render political cartoons useless. And I don't agree with that. I agree that they're a good thing. They should exist. They can coexist with political cartoons. I don't think they should take over, or they can take over, basically, and basically for two reasons. I think the artistic quality of political cartoons have an added value. So the fact that you have a style that you develop as a cartoonist, that you're able to really use a beautiful visual language to make a point, has an added value. And secondly, I believe that making satire and making good, scathing, to the point, sharp satire is a profession. Basically saying that memes and political memes are the same as political cartoons, and therefore we don't need political cartoonists, is basically saying that anybody can be a stand-up comedian. And that we don't need stand-up comedians anymore. We just need a soapbox in the street, and everybody can jump on and make jokes, and that's fine. So to say that they take over and that they replace political cartoons is, for me, to negate the fact that political cartooning is a profession.
But so what? I mean, it's a difficult question, I understand, but like, what makes a good political cartoon to you?
Well, I think it's very subjective, because satire, in a sense, it's subjective, because what I find funny and good, you might find tasteless, offensive, or really bland. So to me, a good political cartoon, and why I got into political cartooning, is a strong visual. It's a visual that you can understand in just a couple of seconds. And I actually prepared a couple of things, because I knew we were going to have this chat. So yeah. Some of my inspiration of why I got into political cartooning, for instance, is, and let me see if it's stuff like this. These are cartoons from the First World War. So the really graphic, visual stuff, where basically you don't need any text to make your point. And the cartoons that I still admire are the ones where cartoonists can, and this one is by O'Neill, for instance. It's from the refugee crisis from a couple of years ago. Stuff like this, where style and message combine to make a really strong visual that has a very strong impact, that can be understood in a couple of seconds, and that says something about the world around us, and basically showcases or puts on the agenda an urgent problem that we're facing and that we need to solve.
But I wanted to also get back to another thing you said before, just to close, to tie in the discussion about the professionalization of the political cartoons. Just because I think there's one point that's really important not to forget, which is that if a cartoonist is not considered a cartoonist, then there's no protection for that person, which means that basically, well, I mean, I know that you are also campaigning for cartoons to be considered journalism, for editorial cartoons to be considered journalism, and I think it's also fits in this discussion, because having a union and being represented would also mean being protected, because I think we are well, we thought maybe we were, but we assume we are on the safe side of political cartooning, because we live in democracies and we are at the center of Europe. But I mean, we both know cartoonists that were in jail or were threatened or were actually subject to violence. And I mean, not being considered a cartoonist or not being considered a journalist can also be a problem on that side, right?
Definitely, and what you see with a lot of cartoonists who've gotten into trouble in the last 10 or 20 years is usually that they were very vulnerable because they weren't part of any professional organization or any journalist association. So the ironic thing is that often cartoonists are one of the first people that are threatened in a newspaper, basically because they have a very strong visual message. It's very easy to be understood. It's very powerful because, well, when you read a newspaper, you can choose not to read a certain column or a certain article, but you cannot ignore the cartoon. You know, once you've seen it, you've read it. And if people find it offensive, it's one of the first things they'll go after is the cartoonist. And what you see when cartoonists get into trouble, it's often that cartoonists do not work where the newspaper is, so they work from home. So they're not that tied in to the other editors, the other journalists. So that makes them more vulnerable. And then they're also not part of any professional association where the journalists are part of. So they don't have any protection that association or organization would offer. So they're the first to be caught or the first to get into trouble in a lot of cases, and they're least protected at the same time. So that's really something that I feel needs to change. And there's a couple of countries where it's different. For instance, in Denmark, cartoonists have been a part of the journalistic association for decades. And they're automatically issued a press card. They're regarded as journalists, which means they get the same protection, same reputation, same rights. And I think that's really, really important for the protection of cartoonists, because basically what it means is that when you do get into trouble, you have an organization that backs you up, that can give shed a light on your work with government, with police protection, all these very important things you need when you get a death threat or when your family is threatened or stuff like that.
Yeah, sorry, my connection
No,
is a
that's
bit
right.
unstable. Okay, yeah, but I also remember. I mean, you're right, and I agree with you. And there's also another side, which is that the cable, which is that the cartoonists are actually less, how do you say, like more vulnerable also on the side of the newspaper. I mean, I remember just one example, which is now in the field really famous, of the New York Times deciding to stop publishing cartoons in its international edition after one government basically just criticized heavily the cartoon that was published, and basically they just got them to eradicate the problem at the root and decide to just drop the cartoons. I mean, would have they dropped an editorial, like a written editorial?
No, probably not. That's
right?
the weird thing. That's the ridiculous thing. It's that they have a ton of columnists, and if they were to be consequent in their behavior and say, hey, we don't want any opinions in our newspaper, they just scrap the entire opinion section of the newspaper and just bring hard news. So it made no sense at all And you're right that the cartoonist tends to be the rather vulnerable position at the newspaper, and that's and I'm not sure if this is true, but I always feel intuitively it's kind of because there's this divide between word people and image people, and you know, editors that you work with are mostly word people. And I feel they have the feeling that they can control editorial content like columns more, because basically they can say, hey, can you rewrite this, or can you edit this a little bit? And cartoons cannot be edited. You know, cartoons are a strong message, and if you're going to nuance it, it's not a good cartoon anymore. So basically, as an editor, you're kind of forced to go along with whatever the cartoonist is making.
Yeah.
And you know, strong messages elicit strong responses. And in the case of New York Times, it was really that fear of having a strong message and then eliciting strong responses. So to me, it was really a form of journalistic cowardice to say, hey, we don't want cartoons anymore.
Yeah, it's also not the only example. I mean, I won't list them, but there are others also recent, quite similar, that basically demonstrate that power has a leverage on newspapers, and it's easy to upset people through cartoons. So basically, it's still. But I know that you are actually in the Netherlands championing for making sure that cartoonists are recognized as journalists, right?
Yeah, definitely. So since last year, I did a couple of interviews over the years where I said, hey, you know, we should be as cartoonists recognized as journalists. And last year, I got a call from the Association of Journalists here in the Netherlands, basically saying, hey, yeah, we want to recognize you. What do you want to do? And I said, well, I think, you know, to entice cartoonists to join up with the association, we need to have a section within the association that's dedicated to cartoonists. So basically, that's what we started last year. Is I pulled some interest from Dutch cartoonists and say, hey, would you be interested in having a section within the Journalist Association that's geared towards cartoonists? Because if we can make ourselves if we can create a space for ourselves within that organization, it means that the organization will have to pay attention to us, which means we'll have a profile within the organization. Because before, you know, it was definitely open for membership to cartoonists. So the Journalistic Association always said, hey, you're a cartoonist, of course you can join. But the problem was that the Journalistic Association did nothing for us cartoonists. So there was nothing about cartoons on their website. There was nothing in their campaigns about cartoonists. So it basically made no sense for us as cartoonists to join. So that's now what we're trying to change. So we set up a section for cartoonists, for political cartoonists, or we're calling it journalistic drawers, because basically we want anyone who's drawing and does that for a newspaper or another media outlet to be able to join. And we created a dedicated group for it within the association. And I think we're approaching 50 members now, something like that. And I have been busy, so I need to pay more attention, or dedicate more of my time to it. But the idea is to give cartoonists a voice in the campaigns that are being, for instance, they have a campaign running for photographers, how they should get a decent price for their work, how their copyright should be protected. That's something, that cartoonists, that goes for cartoonists as well. So we could definitely join a campaign like that. I'm always also looking into, setting up specific events and organize different things that are, especially interesting to cartoonists. Also with an eye of getting some more young cartoonists to join. So for instance, this is not going to happen now due to the coronavirus crisis, but hopefully after the pandemic, basically set up an evening for cartoonists and editors and get them to talk. Because as you remember, just a few minutes ago, I talked about, the difference between word people and visual people. And it to me, it would be such a good idea to get cartoonists in a room, get hopefully some young aspiring cartoonists in a room, and then combine them with editors-in-chief and opinion editors, and basically have them talking, ask the editors, hey guys, what are you looking for? What are you looking for in cartoons? In cartoonists, are you open to running cartoons, running more cartoons? And then also having cartoonists explain their profession, explaining why they do what they do, what the added value of cartoons is, and basically bring them a little bit closer together. Because ever since we invented email and invented, digital drawing, I go to my newspaper. I come there like once a year, maybe. And other cartoonists as well. So it's good to make those ties between media outlets and cartoonists who work for them, who want to work for them stronger. So stuff like that is it's also part of making cartoonists or making the profession more integrated within the landscape of journalism.
But what about instead the other side of the scope, which is bringing the people near the cartoonists? So for the same reasoning that you were applying now, maybe it will be also interesting to have cartoonists. I'm thinking, for example, of there's an event by Persenprint, which is called Ink Spot Battle, which is basically a battle of cartoonists that, of course, was cancelled because of the virus. But now it's going to be online. But it was, I mean, I would have been participating because for me, it was really interesting for the people to see how a cartoonist is actually working and how a cartoon is produced, and also what's the process behind. So do you think that there is also a way for bringing the cartoons nearer to the people in terms of like bringing them to the squares, aside from the exhibitions, but I mean also with activities?
Yeah, I think the one challenge that always faces us here in the Netherlands is that, for instance, in France, you have loads of these kinds of activities. And that's because the tradition of cartooning in France is really geared towards drawing fast. And that means that 70–80% of the cartoonists who work in France are also really, really good at drawing live and making cartoons on the spot. The challenge for Dutch cartoonists is that we're not. So every year when such a battle is organized, it's very tough to find cartoonists to participate, because most of the cartoonists are like, I don't want to draw live. That's not my thing. So that's a challenge to be overcome, because I do totally agree that doing stuff like this is important. I would personally, ideally, I would like to see stuff like this. So the live drawing and the sketch battles. I'd like to see it combined with a more serious topic. So also do a roundtable where you talk about satire, talk about censorship, talk about the issues facing cartoonists. Because the problem with doing stuff like this is really fun, but it runs the risk of portraying cartoonists as like people who can do a trick, people who are merely entertainers. And I always want to get the message across whenever we do a cartoon related activity, is that cartooning is a skill and it's fun. It's we can do something, we can make something, and it's definitely fun to watch us make something. But it's also a serious profession, and it's also there's something more behind it than just being able to draw funny pictures.
Of course.
But yeah, definitely, I think it adds huge added value to do stuff like that, to shed more light in the profession.
And I'm just gonna go back to the well, actually, let me open two parentheses before. So I wanted to answer a comment that I saw before. I was saying it's a pity there's no translation. Unfortunately, and it was in Spanish. So unfortunately, I don't speak Spanish, but this live is also recorded, and then we will put it on the YouTube channel and on the Facebook channel, and also on the IGTV, on the Instagram channel. So for whoever cannot follow entirely, they can just like get back and look at it again. And the second thing, of course, it's open for questions. So whoever has a question can just like ask it, and I will just see it appearing at the bottom of the screen. But going on with what I wanted to ask you, well, again, on the personal line, your personal point of view, like, so you draw, how many cartoons do you draw a week?
I try to do 4. Usually I do 3, I think, on average.
And how do you get your ideas for the cartoons?
So I wake up and I go online and I watch the news basically to see what's happened during the day. And then the one tip I always give my students when I do workshops or I teach art school, and I talk about political cartoons, and I say, hey, if you want to make a political cartoon yourself, it's basically you find the piece of news that you get most upset about. Because it's my personal philosophy that the thing that makes you most angry will be the best cartoon, because that's the thing that gets you wired up. That's the thing where you think, hey, people should think about this. Hey, people should really change this. This is something that needs to be put on the agenda. So that kind of determines my subject.
Or you don't
And
get
then
suggestions from your editors, for example?
no, I'm completely free,
Okay.
and it's also, and I also want to be, So I'll do illustrative stuff sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
where I'll get a subject. But for my newspaper cartoon and the syndicated stuff, that's all me. And that's to me, that's also the beauty of the art. It's completely. It's my opinion. It's my subject. It's my take. It's what I consider to be important. So that's also part of the joy of cartooning for me. So I wouldn't like to be told what subject I should draw about. And then I live about 3 miles, 5 kilometers from my work, and I usually walk to work, which is an hour's walk. And I use that time to think about how I can best translate the subject into a drawing, basically. And then I'll probably get the main concept of what I want to draw. And then when I get into my studio, I'll start sketching. And for me, I'm very much a cartoonist with the principle less is more. So I'll start out with a lot of elements, and then I'll basically eliminate elements until I get to the core of the message. And the fewer elements you need, the better to me, because it means your point gets understood more quickly. And the more quick people are to understand a cartoon, the more impact you have, or I believe I have, with my stuff.
And what can go wrong?
For me, the biggest thing that goes wrong is that I eliminate too much stuff and people don't understand my cartoon anymore.
Okay.
So that will happen, where I'm like, I think, and I think it's an issue that more cartoonists face, because basically, making a cartoon takes about 3-4 hours for me, and in that time, you're just in your mind working with this one picture. So you convinced yourself that it's a great picture and that everybody will understand it. But of course, that's not the case. So I'll sometimes when I'm not sure, I'll ask my studio partner, or I'll call my girlfriend and say, hey, can you look at this? Is it understandable? Or should I, do I need to add anything or something? But for me, that's the biggest challenge, is making it understandable. Because I tend to oversimplify things and make them therefore not understandable anymore.
Yeah, I have the same, and I feel for me the toughest part is actually when I spend maybe 2 hours on an illustration, and then my girlfriend tells me I don't get it, and
Yeah,
I am forced to admit that actually is not clear, or that the idea is just clear in my mind instead. So
exactly. Yeah.
starting from the beginning, maybe even just starting completely with another idea. Yeah.
Yeah, but because your style is very comparable to mine in the sense that you also, you do images without text, and you do, very simple images in the sense that they have few elements in them. You rely on like 3-4 elements to tell the story within the cartoon.
Yeah, to say that I worked hard, I totally agree with you about the simplification, meaning that I really worked hard to try and get rid of the noise around the concept, sticking to the rule that 2-3 elements are the maximum, and then if it's not clear with those, it will not be clear if I add more stuff. So yeah, I mean, I'm really working hard on that, and I think it's the way to go. If you look at good cartoonists, they are really just using a couple of good elements, and that's enough with the cartoon. And about this, I wanted to ask you: is there any name that is a point of reference for you in terms of cartoons?
Well, I have a couple of cartoonists that really inspired me. And funnily enough, one of the people who inspired me most is probably Kevin Gallagher from The Economist.
Mm-hmm.
And his style and his manner of working is like totally opposite to mine. So he started out as a caricaturist, basically. So early in his career, he was in the street doing caricatures. And it was a coincidence that he got asked by The Economist to start doing political stuff for them. But he's a black and white artist. I work only in color. He works really intricate pencil drawings, and he uses a lot of text. He does illustrations where he doesn't have dialogue, but in his editorial stuff, there's always dialogue or labels or stuff. But it's still really, really good. So that also goes to show you that political cartooning, my style or our approach to cartooning, is not the only approach. You can also use text and use it really well. But there's a skill to that. And I'm sidetracking a little bit, but because for me, when I do a cartoon now, and I have to include text because sometimes I'll have to, just for the point that I'm trying to make, I really need to include either a speech bubble or some form of text. I struggle with it because I do so much textless cartoons. I really struggle with finding, the right balance in dialogue and the right amount of text and then what should it say. So if I do a text cartoon, I'll like doubt myself for an hour or so on what to include and what should I say and what text should there be. So that's also a skill unto itself. And so that one was, I think, someone who really got me into cartooning. And I think in general, for some reason, before I started Cartoon Movement, I was always really impressed with American editorial cartoonists for some reason. And I still am to a certain degree. But Cartoon Movement really taught me getting in touch with all these international cartoonists, from different parts of the world, more about different traditions of cartooning and different ways of doing cartoons. And I think the cartoonists that I admire most now are the ones who are really able to combine style and message. So to get this balance right between being able to draw really well, but also being able to be really on point with a message, and combine those two where the style like really reinforces the message. So it's not just oh, it's beautifully drawn, but oh, it's like the whole package is really good.
Okay, so I'm gonna just like go change topic because I see there are two questions. So the first one is about self-motivation, which maybe I will interpret it this way. Maybe refers to, okay, you draw 4 cartoons a week. Are you always in good shape and sharp, and you can find the motivation to draw the cartoons, or you have moments in which you're like, it's heavy and maybe this week I feel like I cannot cope or things like this.
I'm always motivated because I really like to draw, and I really like to voice my opinion.
Okay, so that's a good combo, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a good combination. I do find that as I tend to draw more, I get better ideas. So if I do like 3-4 cartoons a week, and I'll do that for 2 months, I get into a rhythm where ideas just pop into my head, and I don't have any creative block. But when I take a break, for instance, when I go on summer holiday and then I've been away for 2 weeks and I get back to my studio, then you have the danger of creative block. So then I'll spend like where normally a cartoon takes me 3-4 hours, then it'll take me 8 hours to come up with an idea. And I'm just sketching and sketching. So I really need to have the rhythm and the flow of working. That really helps for me. So yeah, I probably couldn't do just 1 cartoon a month, because then every cartoon would be like this ordeal where I'm looking up to this mountain and I'm like, oh, I have to do a cartoon. I don't have any ideas. Whereas, if I do a cartoon every day, it's like, you have like the ideas come kind of automatically.
And what about instead, so this is the second question, what about instead advices to avoid unconscious self-censorship?
It's self-censorship is part and parcel to a cartoonist. It's a part of our profession, because our cartoons are for an audience, and at least to me, it's when I draw a cartoon, I'm always thinking, and I'm always consciously thinking about how will the audience respond to my image, because basically I'm visualizing an opinion, and I'm trying to get a certain response from the audience. So I want to make them laugh, or I want to make them angry, or I want to shock them. Basically, I want them to get them thinking about the topic that I'm drawing about. For me, it's not really a matter of that I'm unconsciously self-censoring myself, because I'm always very consciously thinking about everything that I draw and what kind of response it will draw from the audience that I'm drawing it for. So it's a matter of, I think, to avoid it, it's just a matter of very deliberately considering the message that you're drawing, and also the response that you want to engender in your audience. So what symbols do you need for that? Do you need very harsh symbols for them? Do you want to get your audience angry? Do you want to shock them? Do you want to make them laugh? And all those things come into play when you're drawing a cartoon.
Mm. So, and there's also another question, which is, what do you think is the difference in between cartoons and illustrations? Because, for example, I actually call political cartoons illustrations many times. We have one thing in Italy that actually there's many ways, of course, to say cartoon, and one of the ways, which is vignetta, is actually kind of diminishing the concept. And I mean, I've seen editorial cartoons that are for me like works of art. Yeah. Although I think there is a difference in between art and political cartoons. So what's your opinion about it?
The distinction or the difference between illustration and cartoons, to me, is that cartoons are autonomous. So illustrations are usually in support of an article. So as an illustrator, you'll have an article, whether it is a newspaper or your book illustrator or whatever, but you're illustrating a story that someone else has written. As a cartoonist, you're telling the story yourself. So the cartoon stands alone and tells its story independently. It's a story unto its own. And that's also one of the main reasons why I do consider cartoonists to be journalists, because a good political cartoon is an independent piece of editorial. You don't need any text with it. That's the beauty of it. It tells the whole story on its own. And an illustration, to me, is always in support of something else.
And what do you think, where do you think is the limit? I mean, for example, let's take Charlie Hebdo. I think my opinion on it is that it is really important as a publication, and pushing the limit is part of the game. But where is the limit?
To me, there is no limit. I'm a very pretty much absolutist when it comes to free speech. So let me nuance and explain that, though. So first of all, I totally agree with you. Charlie Hebdo should be there, and they have a right to exist. Would I personally draw for Charlie Hebdo? Probably not, because and probably they wouldn't want me, because my work is too nuanced and not harsh enough, probably for them. But it's also not the type of cartoons that I want to make. It's not my type of satire that I want to do. But it does have a right to exist. So I have personal limits to what I want to do with my satire. I have boundaries that I set for myself for my work. But should those boundaries apply in general? No. And to me, it's because I think that in a healthy society, in a democratic society with a good public debate, if you pose an extreme idea that will offend people, that will cross some boundaries, you should rely on the public debate to correct that. So for every really extremist idea, there should be enough moderate ideas to counter it. And once you say, hey, we're going to have harsh boundaries and we're going to have a judge decide what's possible and what's not, I think that's problematic, because there's no such thing as black and white in public discussions. So basically, you're asking a judge to be the judge of grayscales and of gray areas. And I think that's really scary, because it puts a judge in a very uncomfortable position of becoming in danger of letting politics or letting his personal views or personal preferences come into play. I think it's really, really difficult to put legal boundaries on freedom of speech. That's my personal opinion. Here in Holland, we do have some boundaries. For instance, you cannot incite hate or spread hate. But as I said, it's very, very much grayscales, which to me is.
So we are almost at the end of this satire talks. I just want to wrap it up a bit, just
Sure.
bringing back, going back to the topic of the coronavirus. So I mean, for myself, and I think for pretty much like everyone in the world, this is a unseen situation. So we are stuck in the house. I read a lot of news. I'm reading much more news now, and I think all media outlets are experiencing just an explosion of visits on their websites, because I think people try to make sense of what is happening. And also, personally, I am quite worried about the implications of what is happening in terms of also privacy and control over people. We said at the beginning of this live streaming that also the cartoon movement is experiencing an increase in traffic. What is your opinion? Do you think what do you think is the role of political cartoons in making sense of what is happening?
I think the role of political cartoons in this crisis is the same as it always is, which is probably akin to what journalism in general does. It's pointing out the problems, the dangers, and the issues that are facing us. So for instance, the dangers of tracking apps for privacy. That's certainly a part where cartoons should point out that danger. The danger of Orban in Hungary using the crisis as a excuse to strengthen his grip on power, as a lot of the more despotic leaders around the world are trying to do now. That's something that cartoonists should respond to, and they should point out that this crisis should in no way harm democracy in the long run. And then that's, to me, the most important role of journalism, of media in general, is to safeguard democracy and to be a check on power. And I think within the media landscape, cartoonists are probably one of the most important people who also do that, who contribute to that role of journalism. So to control power and to safeguard our freedom and the liberties that we have, and that means in a crisis such as this is pointing out the dangers of governments either infringing on privacy, taking too much power for themselves, stuff like that. And on the other hand, also pointing out the good things and the heroics. We have one Iranian cartoonist who's been doing this series on cartoon movement of basically celebrating the work that healthcare workers do, and really paying tribute to that. Which is immensely popular also on our personal social media channels. And I think that's also great. But, that's also a role of cartooning. So it's very varied, but again, it boils down to the power that cartoons have to basically visually tell a message and tell it in a very impactful way.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna ask the people that are following us if there's any other question, because in a few minutes we will end this live streaming. In the meantime, I'm just reminding that this conversation is recorded, of course. It is the first episode of the Satire Live Talks. We have other cartoonists from other areas of the world that will talk to us in the next weeks, in 2 weeks. So it's every other Saturday or every other week anyway. And I think it's been really interesting for me. I mean, as I said, I'm also doing editorial cartoons, but this is really the moment to spend time talking about it. And my hope is just that the situation the website like editorial cartoons, like the cartoon movement or other editorial cartoonists website will just like thrive and expand their audience, because the big potential editorial cartoons has is to be cross-cultural, and they just don't know any boundaries because of how they're made. So yeah, I'm really thank you for this conversation. Again, Ted Royards, editorial editor-in-chief of the Cartoon Movement. So like the first episode, of course, we wanted to start in-house. It was also something that we wanted to try out. I think it went really well. It was a really interesting conversation. So I see there are no other questions. Again, you can find this this episode recorded. We will post it on the social media of the Cartoon Movement. If you have any other question after, you can just comment under the live streaming, and we will see you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks so much, everyone. It was lovely talking to you, Emma, and really nice conversation.
Thank you. Ciao, guys.
Cool. Ciao.
Enjoy your weekend. Ciao, ciao.